Out on the open sea, a giant rises from the waves, an entire city of steel set afloat with one purpose: to dominate the oceans. This is no ordinary warship. It is the United States Navy's most advanced aircraft carrier, a floating fortress so powerful its very presence shifts the balance of global power. Every radar pulse, every hum of its systems declared the same truth: this ship is unstoppable. And today, you'll see why the world can't stop talking about it. The world's most advanced warship. When you talk about the biggest, most powerful war machines on the planet, nothing even comes close to a United States Navy supercarrier. These floating giants don't just carry planes, they carry entire wars on their backs. And right now, the one that stands at the very top is the USS Gerald R. Ford, the newest crown jewel of America's fleet. This ship isn't just another carrier, it's the first in an all-new class that takes everything the old Nimitz class did and pushes it into a whole new era. Think of it as a nuclear-powered city at sea, built to change the way carriers fight for the next half-century. The Ford is about 1,106 feet long from end to end. That's longer than 3 football fields lined up. The flight deck itself stretches roughly 256 feet across, which is wide enough to park a couple of jumbo jets wingtip to wingtip with space to spare. Fully loaded, the whole thing tips the scales at about 100,000 tons. But don't think for a second that size makes it slow. Thanks to 2 nuclear reactors powering 4 giant shafts, the Ford cruises along at over 30 miles per hour, which is wild for something this massive. It was built in Virginia at Newport News Shipbuilding by Huntington Ingalls Industries, and it carries the name of President Gerald R. Ford. The ship's sponsor is his daughter, Susan Ford Bales, who helped launch it into service. Now, those nuclear reactors are the real heart of the ship. They're called A1B reactors, and here's the key thing. They're simpler and cleaner than the old ones on Nimitz-class carriers, but they pump out way more juice. We're not just talking about propulsion. These reactors feed enough electricity to run the catapults, the arresting gear, the radars, the computer systems, and whatever new high-powered weapons the Navy decides to bolt on in the future. Climb up to the flight deck and one detail jumps out immediately: the island. That's the tower on the right-hand side of the ship where flight ops and navigation are run. On the Ford, it's been pushed back about 140 feet farther than it sits on a Nimitz, and it's been shifted slightly outboard. It's also smaller overall. Why? To open up more working space on deck. The Navy didn't do this for looks. They did it because more open space means fewer traffic jams when planes are moving, fueling, and lining up for launch. And on a carrier, traffic jams waste time, and time is everything. Now comes the most exciting upgrade: launching and recovering jets. Forget the old steam catapults that slammed planes into the air. The Ford uses something called EMALS, short for Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System. Instead of steam shooting a piston, EMALS uses linear electric motors to pull the aircraft smoothly down the track. The acceleration is cleaner, the stress on the aircraft is reduced, and the system can be dialed up or down depending on the plane's weight. It doesn't matter if it's a lightweight drone or a heavy fighter jet, EMALS can launch it with the exact push it needs. This is straight up 21st century stuff, and what goes up must come down. On the Ford, landing aircraft is handled by the Advanced Arresting Gear, or AAG. The old water turbine systems are history. AAG is a digital, power-controlled system that catches aircraft with more precision and across a wider range of sizes. This means Ford can recover future drones, lightweight craft, or today's heavy fighters without needing separate setups. EMALS and AAG together give the Navy a launch and recovery cycle that's smoother, safer, and built to handle whatever the future throws at it. Of course, none of this matters if you can't move weapons fast. The Ford was designed with 11 advanced weapons elevators that don't run on old cables or hydraulics. These are electromagnetic lifts, built to haul heavier loads faster with fewer sailors needed. They run like futuristic freight elevators, bringing bombs and missiles from deep in the ship up to the flight deck in record time. The Navy made a huge deal when all 11 came online, because this was one of the hardest features to get right. But it's crucial, because quicker weapons movement means planes can get armed and sent back into the fight faster. The deck layout ties it all together. By shrinking the island and reorganizing lanes, the Ford created about 5 extra acres of usable deck space. That's 5 acres where planes can be staged, fueled, and armed without crossing paths constantly. On a busy day, that's the difference between chaos and order. And this leads to the most important metric of all: Sortie generation. A sortie is just one aircraft mission. Take off, do the job, land. The Ford was built to crank out more sorties per day than any carrier before it. Even the aircraft elevators got an upgrade. Instead of 4, the Ford has 3, but each one can lift 200,000 pounds. That's enough to move the heaviest planes the Navy has. Cutting from 4 to 3 may sound like a downgrade, but with the smarter deck layout, 3 is plenty, and it means less hardware to maintain, which is a big deal when you're trying to keep the ship running smoothly at sea. Now let's talk about the tech that helps the Ford see and fight. The big one is the dual-band radar, or DBR. This isn't just one radar, it's 2 types, an X-band for tracking and multi-function work, and an S-band for wide-area searches, fused together through one controller. The end result is a crystal-clear view of the battle space without a jungle of spinning dishes. That radar ties into the ship's brain, the Ship Self-Defense System, or SSDS. The easiest way to think about SSDS is like an automated nervous system. It takes the radar inputs, spots incoming threats, and directs the right weapons automatically. Instead of sailors scrambling through steps, SSDS fuses it all instantly. Detect, track, engage. When you're facing supersonic missiles, those seconds matter. On top of that, the Ford plugs into the wider Navy network with something called Cooperative Engagement Capability, or CEC. That means the Ford doesn't just see with its own eyes. It shares and receives sensor data from other ships and planes in the group, like the E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft. Together, they build one massive shared picture of the sky and sea. If a missile pops up beyond the Ford's radar horizon, another ship might see it and pass the data instantly. That's next-level teamwork. Now let's walk around the outside and check out the physical defenses bolted right onto the hull. The Ford packs 3 layers of protection. First are the RIM 162 Evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, or ESSMs, which cover medium-range threats like fast-moving aircraft or incoming missiles. Next are the RIM 116 Rolling Airframe missiles, or RAMs. These are fire-and-forget missiles built to shred low-flying sea-skimming missiles at close range. And then, the last line of defense, the Mark 15 Phalanx CIWs, the radar-guided Gatling gun that spits thousands of rounds a minute. Together, these 3 layers make sure anything that slips through gets one hell of a fight. But here's where Ford might impress you most. It does all this with fewer people. The old Nimitz class needed more crew to keep everything going. The Ford was designed from the start to sail with several hundred fewer sailors. That's because so many systems that used to be steam-driven or manual are now electric and digitally controlled. The ship is set up for longer gaps between major overhauls too, 12 years between big dockings and a 43-month cycle for maintenance. That means less time stuck in shipyards and more time at sea doing the job. This shift from steam to electric power is huge. On older carriers, steam didn't just drive the ship forward. It powered the catapults, the arresting gear, even basic ship services. The Ford strips all that out. By replacing steam with electric systems, you cut down on pipes, valves, leaks, and constant repair jobs. Electricity is easier to control, easier to distribute, and way less of a headache for the crew. That leads to better living conditions too. With fewer hot, cramped spaces to babysit, sailors spend less time crawling around sweaty machinery rooms. Digital control rooms replace old watch stations, which means fewer bodies needed to keep systems running. The hangar bay is laid out with 2 huge open spaces instead of 3 cramped ones, so aircraft can be moved without constant reshuffling. To the average sailor, these small changes mean less frustration and more efficiency. When you put all of this together, here's the bottom line. The USS Gerald R. Ford is a 1,100-foot, nuclear-powered, electric-heavy supercarrier built to launch and recover more planes, faster, and with fewer people than ever before. It's got radars that see farther, computers that think faster, defenses that hit harder, and a deck designed to flow smoothly under pressure. It costs less to maintain over its lifetime, it has room to grow into the future, and it sets the stage for every Ford-class carrier that will follow. Alright, enough about what the Ford is. Let's talk about what the Ford does. How this supercarrier fights. The Ford isn't just a giant piece of steel floating in the ocean. What makes it scary to enemies is how it actually runs when it's out there on operations. This ship is the centerpiece, but it's not just about the ship itself. What gives it real power are the planes it carries and the strike group that sails with it. If you really want to understand how the Ford fights, you've got to see how the deck runs when it's alive, how the squadrons launch in and out like clockwork, and how every single piece fits together into one massive machine. The air wing is the sword and the shield of the Ford. On this ship, you've got FA-18 Super Hornet squadrons, and they aren't just numbers on paper. They've got names you've probably heard before. The Reagan Bulls, the Black Lions, the Tomcatters, and the Golden Warriors. Then there are the EA-18 Growlers. Those are the electronic attack jets flown by the Grey Wolves. If you see a plane with a giant radar dish on its back, that's the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, and those crews go by the name Bear Aces. The helicopters are the MH-60 Seahawks flown by the Tridents and the Spartans, and each version of that helicopter does a different job. And keeping the whole thing supplied are the C-2 Greyhounds, flown by the Rawhides, delivering spare engines, critical parts, and even the mail. That's today's Carrier Air Wing. Every single one of those names points to a specific job, and when you put them all together, that's what makes the Ford dangerous. The Super Hornets are the main workhorses. They do just about everything. If you need to keep enemy jets away, they go up on combat air patrol with missiles ready. If you need to smash a ship or a base on land, they swap their loadouts and go with bombs or anti-ship weapons. They can even act as flying gas stations. They carry what's called a buddy refueling system, which is just a hose and drogue pod under the jet that lets one Hornet give fuel to another. That little trick sounds simple, but it's a game changer. A little extra fuel in the middle of a mission can be the difference between finishing the job or turning back. It extends range, keeps jets in the air longer, and makes sure no one runs out of gas at the worst time. Right behind them are the Growlers. These jets don't carry a full load of bombs like the Super Hornets. Instead, they carry powerful jamming gear. The Navy calls their job electronic attack and suppression of enemy defenses. Basically, they blind radars, jam communications, and target missile sites on the ground. If the strike package is going into defended airspace, the Growlers are in the lead. They open the lane, they shut down radars, and they protect the rest of the flight. Without them, the risk goes way up. With them, you've got a much better chance of getting in, hitting the target, and getting out alive. Then you've got the Hawkeye, the plane with the giant spinning dish on top. That dome is not for show. Inside, the crew is building the big picture for the entire fight. They scan for threats far out, tell who's friendly and who's not, and push taskings out to the fighters. The Navy's official label for it is Airborne Early Warning and Command and Control. But in simple words, the Hawkeye is the lookout, the traffic cop, and the group chat for every aircraft in the air. Without the Hawkeye, the air wing would be flying blind. Down low and out on the edges of the formation are the Seahawks. The Romeo version of the MH-60 hunts submarines and ships. It carries dipping sonar, sonobuoys, torpedoes, and missiles. You'll often see Romeos flying from the destroyers and cruisers that guard the Ford. The Sierra version of the Seahawk does everything else. It handles search and rescue, hauls cargo and people, and supports small boat crews. The Navy's own breakdown is clear. The Romeo hunts subs and ships, while the Sierra is the multi-tool that does hauling, rescue, and general utility. Both are essential, even if they don't get as much spotlight as the fighters. And then there's the Greyhound, the C-2 cargo plane. These are the lifeline. They run what the Navy calls COD flights, carrier onboard delivery. They bring in mail, spare engines, high-priority gear, and people. It's not glamorous, but it's critical. Navy photos show Greyhounds constantly landing on the Ford during operations. Without resupply, the jets stop flying. The Greyhounds keep the whole machine fed. Now let's look at how all of this actually flows on deck. Like I said earlier, a sortie is one flight cycle. Launch, mission, recovery. Everything happens in a rhythm. First, a package of jets launches. That usually includes fighters on patrol and a Hawkeye up top to keep eyes on the sky. If the mission involves enemy defenses, Growlers go out too. Those planes head off to do their jobs. And while they're gone, the deck crews are already turning the next group. They're fueling, loading weapons, doing checks, and staging jets for the catapults. By the time the first wave comes back, the next one is ready to go. The Ford's design upgrades make that cycle smoother. The island was moved farther back, so the taxi lanes for jets are straighter. The weapons elevators are electromagnetic, not old-school hydraulic, and they bring bombs and missiles right up where they're needed. The catapults and arresting gear are electric instead of steam, which makes launches and landings faster and easier to manage. Congress and the Navy both make the same point about all this. It's not about one big surge. It's about sustaining high sortie rates for days and weeks. It's about keeping up the grind. But that's just the deck side. The other half is command and control. The Hawkeye doesn't just watch the skies. It shares its radar tracks with the whole strike group. Step back again, and you see the escorts. The Ford never sails alone. Cruisers and destroyers sail with it, extending the radar reach and carrying long-range missiles. Their Aegis combat systems can handle multiple threats at once, firing standard missiles hundreds of miles away. Basically, they form the outer wall, keeping the distant sky clear so the Ford can focus on launching planes instead of dodging missiles every few minutes. Day to day, a big part of the job is just being there. Presence and deterrence. The strike group positions itself in places that matter, flies patrols, and shows the flag so potential troublemakers think twice. Carriers are built for this kind of grind. Show up, stay on station, and handle whatever pops up. The Navy officially lists missions as deterrence, sea control, power projection, and humanitarian relief. That last one matters more than people realize. When a storm or earthquake wrecks a coastline, the Ford can park offshore and act as an airport and a city at the same time. Helicopters deliver food, water, and medical teams. The air wing provides communications and coordination. Carriers have done this time and time again because nothing else moves that much help that quickly. Surveillance never stops. Hawkeyes scan from high altitude, fighters carry pods that track and record targets, and helicopters patrol low and beyond the horizon. All of that data feeds into the network so commanders can adjust the plan in real time. That's the reality of how the Ford operates. It's not just a floating runway, it's the center of a moving, breathing combat system. It's a rhythm of launches and recoveries, a constant flow of information, and a team where every part is tuned to work together. When it all clicks, it becomes the kind of power projection only a carrier strike group can deliver. Now that you know what makes the Ford different, let's step back to its history, how it all began, the setbacks, and the moment its first deployment proved it could deliver. The story behind the Ford. The Ford's story doesn't begin with it sailing out to sea for the first time. It started much earlier, back in the 1990s and the early 2000s, when the Navy was asking a big question: what comes after the Nimitz class? That question set off a program first called CVN-10, then later CVN-21. The idea sounded simple, but it was anything but easy. They wanted a carrier that could generate a lot more electrical power, need fewer sailors to run, and launch way more flights per day. From that long effort came the lead ship of a brand new class, CVN-78, or the USS Gerald R. Ford. Congress later locked the final price at about $13.3 billion. Now, let's walk the timeline so this doesn't feel like a blur. The Ford was officially funded in fiscal year 2008. In November of 2009, they laid the keel, which is basically the ship's backbone. On November 9, 2013, the ship was christened. Then came delivery to the Navy on May 31, 2017. Just a few weeks later, on July 22, 2017, the ship was commissioned. Once the Navy had the Ford in hand, it wasn't like they could just send it out to patrol. Brand new ships always go through a period of shakeout and fixes. The Ford finished acceptance trials in May 2017 and immediately went into what they call post-delivery tests and trials. That was followed by a post-shakedown availability at Newport News in mid-2018. That period gave the Navy and the shipbuilders a chance to work through the issues that naturally show up in a ship that's the first of its class. One of the biggest tests for any new carrier is called the full ship shock trial. This is not a computer simulation. It is exactly what it sounds like. The Navy sets off massive underwater explosions right next to the carrier to see if the ship can take the hits and still function. The Ford went through this trial in the summer of 2021. 3 blasts were set off in total. Each one was larger than the last, and each one was detonated closer to the ship. Each charge had a force of 40,000 pounds, and all 3 went off in the Atlantic Ocean. The ship passed each test, proving it could take a punch and keep operating. But this wasn't a clean sweep. Both the Navy and the Independent Test Office, DOT&E, admitted that problems were discovered, and the Navy still needs to finish fixing them. Another problem that dragged on for years involved the ship's advanced weapons elevators. The Ford carries 11 of them, and they are essential for moving weapons up to the flight deck. The Navy would not call the ship fully ready for serious deployment until every one of those elevators was completed and turned over. The Navy's Systems Command announced on December 22, 2021, that all 11 were finished. That was one of the biggest roadblocks finally cleared. The Navy subsequently declared that the Ford had reached initial operating capability in December of 2021. After that, the ship did a short deployment in late 2022. Then it went back into preparations for what would be its first real, full-length deployment in 2023. But the part of the story that really matters here is the long, formal test phase called Initial Operational Test and Evaluation, or IOT&E for short. This is where the Navy proves in real-world conditions that the ship can do what it was built to do. For the Ford, that phase officially started in September 2022, and based on unclassified reporting, is still running. Some of the events even had to be pushed into 2025 because of how the deployment schedule played out. That deployment is worth pausing on because it gave the Ford its first real chance to show what it could do. On May 2, 2023, the ship sailed out of Norfolk on its first extended cruise. It was originally headed for Europe to operate under 6th Fleet. Then, on October 7, 2023, Hamas launched its attack on Israel. In response, the Secretary of Defense ordered the Ford strike group to the eastern Mediterranean. The deployment was extended, and the ship stayed there to hold the posture the United States wanted. It wasn't until January 17, 2024, that the Ford finally sailed back into Norfolk. During that 262-day deployment, the Navy said the Ford launched 8,725 times and had the same number of arrested landings. The weapons elevators were put through 11,369 runs, moving more than 1,829,580 pounds of ordnance up to the deck. Those are impressive stats, and they were logged by the official test office. But here's the nuance. DOT and E also said they don't yet have enough reliability data to say how dependable the launch and recovery systems are in the long term. They also flagged that the crew leaned more on outside technical support than they'd like. So the raw numbers are real, but the full reliability verdict isn't in yet. But IOT and E isn't just about how many times the ship can launch and recover planes. In February and March of 2024, the Navy ran cyber survivability events for the Ford while it was pierside, with the testing community observing. More cyber testing will come when the ship is underway. On top of that, survivability against physical threats is being studied using updated ship models. These models are built with data from the shock trials and other events. Once those models are complete, the Navy will be able to give a full assessment of how the ship holds up. Put simply, they blew big charges near the ship in 2021, and now they're combining that data with modeling and follow-on tests to finish the full picture. The Ford's self-defense testing is another important piece. This mixes live fire events with computer modeling to figure out how well the ship can defend itself from cruise missiles and other threats. DOT and E approved a modified testing plan in April of 2024, but some of the live fire events slipped into 2025 because the ship needed maintenance after its long deployment. That's not unusual. Those live tests will be used to confirm whether the ship's defensive models are accurate. There's also the matter of the Ford's radar. It's the only carrier fitted with the dual-band radar, and while it works, being a one-of-a-kind system comes with problems. Keeping enough spare parts on hand and making sure the radar stays available has been harder than expected. The Navy's reports are clear about this, and say the plan is to replace it with the Enterprise Air Surveillance Radar, or EASR, during future upgrades. Until then, DBR sustainment is a challenge. Those original class goals, more electrical power, fewer crew, and higher sortie rates, remain the baseline for how the Navy and Congress are judging the Ford. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.